I was patrolling at night around 3 a.m. when I noticed a car with its lights off parked on a side street. It was a large Dodge truck, an older model that looked like it had seen better days. The truck sitting there in the darkness just didn't feel right. Something about the scene made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I decided to check it out. I flipped on my sirens, illuminating the truck with flashing red and blue lights. The truck didn't move, but I could see the silhouette of the driver inside. I parked my cruiser a few feet behind the truck, stepped out and approached it cautiously, one hand resting on my holster. I tapped on the driver's window with my flashlight. "License and registration, please," I said, my voice steady but firm. The driver rolled down the window slowly, and I got my first good look at him. He was in his 50s, bald with black facial hair, and his eyes were cold and unsettling. He handed me his papers without a word. "Mr. Dunn," he said, his voice calm but menacing, "do you want to see your wife tonight? It's Sarah, isn't it?" My heart skipped a beat. How did this guy know my name? How did he know my wife's name? I tried to keep my composure, but my mind was racing. I knew I had to stay professional and not let him see that he had rattled me. "Step out of the vehicle," I commanded, trying to maintain authority. He didn't move. Instead, he just smirked at me. "Why don't you let me go, officer? I wouldn't want anything bad to happen to your lovely wife." That did it. I pulled out my gun, aiming it at him. "Get out of the car now!" I yelled, my voice echoing through the empty street. Instead of complying, he started the truck and drove off. I was stunned for a moment. Then I snapped back to reality. I quickly noted down the plate number and jumped back into my cruiser. I sped after him, but he had already disappeared into the night. Back at the station, I immediately ran the plate number through the system. Nothing. It was as if the truck didn't exist. I reported the incident to my superiors, but without a registered plate number or more concrete evidence, there wasn't much we could do. The whole encounter left me shaken. How did he know my name and my wife's name? What was his game? I went home that morning and checked on Sarah. She was asleep, completely unaware of what had happened. I didn't want to scare her, so I kept the details to myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The man's threat replayed in my mind over and over. For the next few days, I was on high alert. Every time I went on patrol, I kept an eye out for that truck. I couldn't let it go. I even checked with local surveillance cameras from nearby businesses, but there was no sign of the truck after it left my sight. As time went on, the truck and its driver seemed to disappear as mysteriously as they had arrived. The plate number I'd taken down wasn't in any database. Despite numerous checks and patrols, I never saw that truck again. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. Months passed, and the eerie sense of dread that had gripped me slowly faded. The threats stopped, the strange car sightings ceased, and life began to return to normal. The incident remained unresolved, but it became just another unsettling chapter in my career. Even now, I sometimes catch myself glancing at passing trucks, half expecting to see that menacing face peering out. The encounter left a mark on me, a reminder that sometimes the scariest things are those we never fully understand. It was a quiet night, and I was patrolling the empty roads near our small town. I was the only cop on duty, which meant if anything happened, I was the one to handle it. Around 3 a.m, dispatch called me about a missing hiker named Emily Turner. She'd been out hiking in the woods for over a day and hadn't been heard from. I grabbed my flashlight and headed into the forest. It was dark and the trees seemed to crowd around me. I hoped I wouldn't be out here all night. Emily's trail was supposed to be well marked, but when I got into the woods, things didn't look right. The markers were missing and the trail was overgrown. As I walked, I noticed strange carvings on the trees. At first, they were just weird shapes, like circles and triangles, but as I went deeper, the carvings got more detailed and creepy. One of them looked like a person with empty eyes. I shivered and kept moving. The forest felt like it was closing in on me. The trees were so dense, and the shadows seemed to twist and move. I came across a clearing with a big stone in the middle. There were more strange markings around it. I tried not to let my nerves get the best of me. I hoped this stone might give me a clue about where Emily was. Suddenly, I heard a loud, sad wail coming from somewhere in the woods. I looked around with my flashlight, but there was nothing there. The sound stopped. leaving only the silence of the forest. I took a deep breath and kept searching. Hours seemed to pass as I walked deeper into the woods. The forest had turned into a maze of tangled branches and bushes. I was starting to think I'd missed something important when I stumbled upon a small campsite. There was a tent set up and some hiking gear scattered around. I saw a pair of hiking boots that looked like the ones Emily wore. I called dispatch again and let them know what I'd found. They told me to stay safe and keep looking. I was starting to worry more about Emily. She could be hurt or in trouble. As I was about to leave the campsite, I noticed footprints leading away from it. They were fresh, but didn't follow a clear path. I decided to follow them, hoping they would lead me to Emily. The footprints went deeper into the woods and seemed to disappear into the underbrush. The forest grew darker as night went on. My flashlight flickered, making it hard to see. I was trying to find my way back when I heard a low, scary growl nearby. My heart raced, and I quickly looked around with my flashlight, but there was nothing there. It felt like something was watching me. I turned back towards the campsite, trying to remember my way. The growl came again, closer this time. I felt like I had to hurry before whatever was out there caught up with me. I made my way back, trying to keep calm. When I reached the campsite again, I saw that the stone had new carvings on it. They were fresh and looked even creepier than before. I was about to call for help when I heard rustling behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight, but only saw a fleeting shadow. I knew I needed to get out of the woods before I got hurt. I made my way back to the edge of the forest just as dawn was starting to break. I was exhausted and scared. The campsite was empty again, and Emily was still missing. I reported everything to dispatch, and they organised a bigger search for her the next day. Despite the search and investigation, Emily was never found. The strange carvings and eerie noises in the woods remained unexplained. It was as if the forest had swallowed her up, and whatever was out there was still hiding. The experience left me feeling uneasy. Every time I drove past the edge of those woods, I couldn't help but feel a chill. The memory of that night, the weird carvings, the growling noises, and the feeling of being watched stayed with me. It was like the forest had something dark and scary lurking in it, and I'd been lucky to get out. I've been a police officer for 20 years. In all that time, I've seen some pretty messed up stuff. But nothing could prepare me for what happened after I arrested Jimmy Comer. Jimmy was a lowlife, a killer. He murdered one of his friends in cold blood during a house party. We'd been looking for him for weeks, and when we finally got a tip-off about his location, my squad and I moved in fast. It was a standard operation until it wasn't. Comer tried to shoot me, but I got to him first. My bullet hit him in the chest and he went down. He died on the scene, eyes full of hatred. That should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. It was just the beginning of my nightmare. A few days after Comer's death, I received the first death threat. It was an anonymous letter left on my doorstep, written in blood-red ink. It said, "You'll pay for what you did. Your family will suffer." I showed it to my superiors, but there wasn't much they could do. Crank threats weren't uncommon in our line of work, but the threats kept coming, almost daily. Letters, emails, even phone calls. Each one was more detailed, more personal, targeting me and my family. I started to get paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every shadow. Then, one morning I walked out to my car to find all 4 tyres slashed. I had just put new ones on the week before. It felt like a direct message. I can get to you anytime, anywhere. Things escalated further when my wife Sarah was attacked. She was walking home from the grocery store when a masked man came up behind her and pepper sprayed her. She managed to stumble home, eyes burning, and I took her to the hospital. Seeing her in that state broke something inside me. Whoever was behind this was not just threatening us, they were actively trying to harm us. I doubled my efforts to find out who was behind the threats. I reviewed every case I had ever worked on, looking for anyone with a grudge. But nothing fit. Then things started getting even stranger. One night I came home to find the living room filled with smoke. A small fire had started in the corner, where a stack of old newspapers was kept. I managed to put it out before it spread, but I couldn't figure out how it had started. We didn't have any candles or anything else that could ignite a fire there. Over the next few days, more fires broke out. A pair of Sarah's socks in the laundry basket, my briefcase in the study, our son's backpack left by the front door. Each time the fire would start spontaneously, with no apparent cause. It was as if our belongings were cursed, set to burn one by one. I started to think I was losing my mind. How could this be happening? There was no logical explanation. I even brought in a fire investigator. But he couldn't find any evidence of foul play. No accelerants, no tampered wiring, nothing. It was like the fires were starting by themselves. Desperation drove me to consider all possibilities, even the ones that seemed insane. I started researching curses and hexes, looking into cases where people claimed to be haunted or cursed. I read about poltergeists, vengeful spirits, and dark magic. It all seemed ridiculous, but I was running out of options. One night, after another small fire, I received a phone call. The voice on the other end was distorted, but the message was clear. "You can't stop this, Eric. Jimmy will have his revenge." The line went dead before I could respond. The next day, I decided to visit Jimmy's old house. I needed answers, and I was willing to try anything. The place was abandoned, condemned after the murder. As I walked through the dilapidated rooms, I felt a chill run down my spine. The air was thick with an oppressive presence. In one of the back rooms, I found something that sent shivers down my spine. It was a small altar, covered in strange symbols and surrounded by burnt candles. There was a photo of Jimmy, along with several personal items that had belonged to him. In the centre of the altar was a blackened, burnt piece of paper with my name on it. It hit me then. Someone had cursed me. Someone who wanted revenge for Jimmy's death. But who? And how could I stop it? I took photos of everything and left the house, my mind racing. Back home, I started piecing together everything I knew about Jimmy's associates and anyone who might have dabbled in the occult. One name stood out, Lena, Jimmy's ex-girlfriend. She was known for her fascination with dark magic and had even been arrested once for vandalizing a church. I tracked Lena down to a rundown apartment on the outskirts of town. When I confronted her, she didn't deny anything. She just smiled and said, "You took Jimmy from me. Now you'll suffer like I have." Her words sent a chill down my spine. I pleaded with her to lift the curse, but she just laughed. "You think it's that simple? You can't just undo what's been done." Desperation set in. I knew I needed a different approach. "Lena, I understand you're in pain, but hurting my family won't bring Jimmy back. This isn't what he would have wanted." She stared at me, her expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Jimmy wouldn't have wanted this," I repeated, trying to reach her. "He wouldn't want more blood on his hands." There was a long silence. Finally, she sighed and looked away. "You don't know anything about Jimmy," she muttered, but there was a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "I know enough to know that he wouldn't want you to destroy yourself over this," I said softly. "Please, Lena, let's end this, for both our sakes." She hesitated, then finally nodded. "Fine, I'll lift the curse, but you have to promise me one thing." "Anything," I said, relief flooding through me. "Promise me you'll remember Jimmy as more than just a murderer," she said, her voice breaking. "He wasn't always like that. He was good once." "I promise," I said. And I meant it. Lena gave me a list of items I needed to gather and instructions for a ritual to lift the curse. It was complicated and required both of us to perform it together. We agreed to meet the next day at a secluded spot by the river. The next day I gathered the items and met Lena by the river. Sarah came with me, not wanting to leave my side. Lena was already there, looking more fragile than I remembered. We performed the ritual as Lena instructed. It was a strange, almost surreal experience. As we chanted and performed the necessary steps, I could feel a weight lifting from my shoulders. When it was over, Lena looked exhausted but relieved. "It's done," she said quietly. "The curse is lifted." "Thank you," I said, genuinely grateful. "I hope you can find some peace now." She nodded and turned to leave. As she walked away, I felt a mix of emotions. Relief, yes, but also deep sadness for what had been lost. Back home, things started to improve. The fires stopped, the threats ceased, and life began to return to normal. It was like a dark cloud had finally lifted. Days turned into weeks, and the memory of the curse started to fade. But the experience had changed us. We were more cautious, more aware of the unseen dangers in the world. One day I received a letter. It was from Lena. She wrote that she had decided to leave town and start fresh somewhere else. She thanked me for helping her see that revenge wasn't the answer. She hoped that we could both move on from this and find peace.